All right. What's up? So, before I jump into today's talk, I had a nice talk with my wife this morning. We did a little reading, reflection after the reading, and we were just talking about therapy and coaching and how hard it is for a lot of people to make the commitment. You know, I see it on a lot of the Facebook groups that I'm in. You know, usually the big one is looking for a therapist that accepts my insurance. And being in this field for many years now, it's, you know, those are just, believe it or not, that's like a very small requirement for what I help people with in terms of who they're looking for, because we don't know who we're going to get. I think trying to find somebody goes such a long way past just taking insurance. Now, I'm a coach. I'm not a certified therapist, and I also don't take insurance, right? So some might say that I might be biased, but I really do try to keep an open mind with all of this. And what I try to talk to people about is you can find a therapist, and you can maybe even find one that takes your insurance and still might not feel comfortable with a therapist or safe enough to open up, or maybe the therapist is not aligned with the exact work that you are trying to do. So that's something that we want to keep in mind, because there has to be just so much trust built when you're working with someone. The other thing me and my wife were talking about was, you know, when you log on to somebody's website and you're trying to look, you know, sometimes people have on there a lot of ways that they help people. Sometimes it's a little too much, right? It's like, oh, I help this person, I help these people, I help couples, I help kids. And I do that because I use DBT and CBT and EMDR and IFS. And they'll make a list of 8 modalities. And to me, I think it's too much. I've been doing IFS and parts work for many years, learning it, reading, studying it, and then practicing it in my own life, as well as in a child work. And that's why in the work that I do, that's my goal with clients, is to do that type of work. So that's why I know I'm not for everybody, nor is everybody for me. But that's a therapist and coach's responsibility to say, hey, that's not where I go. That's not my strength. But I almost think when we create these websites, it's like, well, the more modalities I use, and then I'm in the mental health field. Like, I'm picking up on all of this, right? My wife's not. So this is why we were talking this morning. And she's like, you know, when I read this stuff on the website, you know, it's like, this is great. I found a great therapist. Oh, look at all the stuff they do. So you know what it makes me think about? Like when you go into a pizzeria, and some pizzerias, they're overdoing it, right? They got all different types of slices, but they haven't even mastered the plain slice. That's what therapy's like. You know, haven't even mastered one thing in order to really bring about significant change and helping somebody else. We have all these different ways that we're going to go about helping you. And it's like, how about we just stick to, right? So the pushback is, well, you know, what happens if you get a client and they don't need inner child work or they don't need parts work? Well, I would tell them that. I would tell them the work that I do, that's not what you need right now. We can continue working together, while you find somebody else, or you can find somebody else, do work in a particular area that you're looking in or you need help with, and then come back to me. That's the healthiest way to go. Anyway, that was just a little tangent that I went on. But yeah, me and my wife had about, a 45-minute talk this morning, which was nice. First of all, it connects us that we are talking about this stuff together, and we're both invested in wanting to be healthier people, not just for ourselves, but obviously for each other and for our son, and to be able to go out into the world and be a healthier version of ourselves, for our neighbors and community. And so that was a good talk. I enjoyed that. Anyway, today's topic is going to be on the inner critic. So the voice that's inside of us that never leaves us alone. Most of us think that our biggest struggles as adults is anxiety or anger or alcohol abuse or some form, another form of addiction, or procrastination, relationship struggles, too much stress. I don't believe any of it is. I think underneath everything I just mentioned is a voice that never lets us slow down, sit still, rest. And I've heard this was taught to me, and I appreciated this, the old saying, like, don't just sit there, do something, right? I heard, don't just do something, sit there. And I appreciated that, because that's what I needed, right? My system can't just sit there. The wheels are always turning. There's something I should be doing. I don't know where it's coming from. I never did inner child and parts work for myself before. Now it's very clear to me, and I've come a very long way in that, and I help other people get to understanding that as well. But this inner critic is a voice that we have, that we've had for many years, so it goes undetected most of the time. We never pay attention to it. And when I use the term inner critic, what I mean is we have thoughts. You can use a voice if that's comfortable for you. But thoughts, you're not good enough. You should be doing more. What's wrong with you? Don't screw this up. You'll never change. You're behind everyone else. You should be further along by now. And that's all inner critic talk. So the topic today is going to be on the inner critic, the voice in our head that constantly evaluates, judges, pressures, and attacks us. How many of you have a voice in your head that's harder on you than other people? Right? When I talk with people, sometimes I'm like, how would you treat your friend? And they would show up with so much more compassion. But for themselves, it's not there. Very hard on themselves. And most of us don't realize how much of that voice influences our lives. And when I help you start to understand how much that inner critic influences your life, you're going to want to really do this work. So what is the inner critic? What am I talking about? One of the biggest mistakes that we make is believing that the inner critic is who we are. Most of us are thought that we are just this one body, one mind. That's not what I've been trained and learned in. So what I've learned over the years with internal family systems therapy is that we all have parts of us. The inner critic is not our true self. It's a protective part. So the inner critic is just a part of us that learned criticism was safer than compassion. And again, we don't even realize that we're listening to the inner critic because it's our voice. It just sounds so normal to us. It's our normal everyday thinking. The other reason is we'll say, well, I have an inner critic, but I'm just motivated, right? That's what will excuse the inner critic. Or I'm just very disciplined, and that's why I think or behave the way I do. I'm just a driven person. Or I'm just a realist. But often, it's an internalized voice that you have been carrying around for possibly decades. The critic often sounds like us. And for a long time when I started this and when I'm helping others, we think the voice is ours. But once we start sifting through other parts, many times we actually start to see that it's somebody else's voice. Our inner critic is always telling us to work harder, do better, don't fail, don't embarrass yourself, don't be weak, don't make mistakes. See, the inner critic in our system believes that it just pushes us harder each time, then we'll avoid touching on one of our 7 core wounds, right? Fear, shame, powerlessness, hopelessness, confusion, abandonment. The inner critic is, believe it or not, trying to help your system out. Again, it's creating problems in your life. There's no doubt. It might even have you living a life that you don't even want to live. Like at a job that's not the job you want to be in. But at the same time, it's helping us avoid something deep within our, system that we aren't fully aware of. And so we're caught living life on the surface by saying, I just don't know what's wrong with me. Like, why do I keep going down this road or choosing these people in my life that keep hurting me? Not realizing the inner critic is doing a lot of it. Predicting you, directing you in these ways. And then, and doing its job. So I know a lot of this talk might be confusing to people. It was for me, especially learning this. It's like, well, if my inner critic is creating issues in my life, then how can I acknowledge, how am I going to appreciate it? Because then you start learning what it's protecting you from, how much pain you're actually carrying inside. And then you're like, oh, okay, all right. Now I'm starting to appreciate the inner critic. So where does the inner critic begin? Where does it come from? Where does it stem from? It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It might seem like that to some of you, but it doesn't. It actually comes from your home environment. Oh, not this again, right? Oh, here we go, back to the parents, always blaming the parents. I am so with everybody that is sick of that. Well, hey, we're all adults, we got to take responsibility. And if you know me, if you're working with me, you know well enough to know that I'm a firm believer in responsibility and accountability and not playing out that victim role. I also do not agree, and my message is never about blaming parents, because again, working with me, you'll realize that your parents also have an inner critic. They have their own parts that help them survive their parenting, and so on and so forth. And we'll start to really realize this generational trauma, this generational dysfunction that keeps getting passed from one generation to the next. It opens the door for us for some compassion. Hey, I'm still looking at, I can still honor my parents. There's no doubt about that. And look at where they neglected me or where they fell short, where I was wounded by them, that I have to take a look at. Both can be true. So having critical parents is going to be problematic because most of us, the people I've talked to, come across over the years, have been criticized more throughout their childhood and then praised. And parents usually are under the impression that they're just trying to push their child further, right? They see the potential their children has, and they just want to make sure they don't settle. So again, it's done in the parent's mind for a particular reason, but usually there's something deeper there. And when you grow up with critical parents on a consistent basis, that's where the inner critic starts to really settle in. Emotionally immature parents, or maybe you had parents that were perfectionistic. Parenting that was done through bullying, right? They didn't care about your emotions. It was all, I'm going to change your behavior right now. Maybe it was done through shame. Oh, look at this, Katie. You know, I can't even tie your shoes yet, right? Now, it could be said with love, right? In terms of being like, they know I love them. I'm just kidding around. Kids don't think logically. They don't have a sarcastic mindset like adults do. So there's potential that there could be harm done, and a lot more than parents even realize. We also might compare kids to maybe their siblings or friends or kids in their class. And there's emotional neglect that all drives everything I mentioned, the inner critic. So again, many parents are passing down what, was given to them. So sometimes the way we talk to ourselves today sounds a lot like how other people talked to us years ago. So I've myself and have clients now that will say, I always thought it was my voice, but now like when I close my eyes or I can settle in, it's not my voice. It's my mom's voice. It's my uncle's voice. It's my dad's voice. So now we could start becoming more aware where this voice was coming from and where it originated. So that's called internalization of our parents. And that's what many of us have done. We've internalized our parents. And not just their words, but their attitudes, their fears, their expectations, their judgments, our parents' anxieties. Basically, their way of relating to themselves and to others. Maybe you grew up with a parent who was critical, perfectionistic, fearful, controlling, emotionally unavailable, or hard on themselves. And children absorb all of that, even by well-intentioned parents not realizing that's what's happening. So, I gave a parent talk the other day at one of my local libraries, and I always say, children don't listen to parents. And as parents, we say this all the time. Oh, they don't listen. I got to tell them 6 times, 7 times. It needs to be modeled what we're looking for, right? We could tell, I just need you to be patient, right? You tell your kid, be patient, be grateful. How are we modeling that? Hey, listen, alcoholism runs in the family, bud. When you get older, your friends are going to start, having a couple of beers. Don't drink, right? Meanwhile, you're half in the bag yourself. So yes, the responsibility is on you, and I understand, and believe me, I know it's a lot easier to speak it than to live it. But if we want to see results within ourselves and our families and our children, then we have to live it. Not perfectly. So maybe you've heard growing up, what's wrong with you? How could you make such a silly mistake? Stop crying. Don't be lazy. By this age, you should know better. So tying in the inner critic now to our adulthood, most of us would say, I don't have an inner critic. We have no idea. And I don't, this is not a judgment on people. This is relatable to my experience, right? When I started hearing the inner critic, I have the same judgments everyone does. I'm like, oh, what are we talking about? But then when I started practicing, paying attention, I began to realize that I was pretty hard on myself, criticizing myself a lot. And not only that, but then I got to a place where I started to identify with that. So, right? So you have a thought that's, how could I make that mistake? And now have a belief that I'm stupid. I'm clumsy, right? So you're tying in your thought with beliefs about yourself, all in a negative light. So in our work, we try to take a look back. Maybe it's mom, maybe it's dad, maybe a teacher, a coach, a sibling. At some point, those external voices that are out here became internal voices. And we are still carrying conversations from childhood inside of our heads. And yes, I know you have to really stay open-minded to what I'm talking about here. I'm fully aware of that. So one of the ways that we try to cope is perfectionism. That's one of the big ones. It's one of the most socially acceptable forms of self-criticism. Most people think perfectionists are, always striving for excellence. Even the person themselves might think, no, I want to excel in life. I want to be better than others. But many perfectionists are actually trying to avoid one of the 7 core wounds, specifically shame. So the critic tells them, don't make mistakes. Right? Put a lot of pressure on themselves. Don't fail. Don't look stupid, and get it right. Do it right the first time. So the consequence of living like this is many perfectionists sometimes never start something new because of that fear of failure. So they don't launch that new business for fear of looking stupid in other people's minds. Like, oh, who are you to start that business? Like, most businesses fail. And, creating content, doing videos like this, right? Don't post that video. What if people are watching this, that? What are they going to say? They don't know this side of you. Are they going to like this side of you? So that's all inner critic thinking, right? So preventing me or you from posting that video maybe that you wanted to, or from responding in a way that you thought you wanted to, and instead you didn't. Maybe, again, maybe not leaving a job and applying for a new one. Having difficult conversations. The fear of imperfection becomes bigger. Way bigger than the desire for growth. And perfectionism doesn't create excellence. It often creates, being stuck. And this is, so hear this out. Even if on the outside you're doing well, right? So other people are looking at you like, how are they stuck in life? Like, look at everything they've acquired. Look at the success that they are having. But if you're a perfectionist, that's never going to be good enough. Another big area that we're going to talk about here is control. Control is another common disguise of the inner critic, right? The inner critic is always telling us, stay in control. That's our safety, right? Don't trust anybody. Better off doing it yourself. Listen, if you stay in charge, if people just listen to you, everything goes accordingly, right? Everything goes right. Control is often an attempt to avoid feeling one of our core wounds, powerlessness. Sometimes people aren't trying to control people, right? Now, they'll have a spouse that's like, you're very controlling, and they'll get defensive. I'm not controlling. They have no idea how controlling they are, because they don't think that their intention is not to control their spouse. Again, this is inner critic, nervous system protection stuff. So to them, it makes a lot of sense. It's their normal that they're living like this. Sometimes parents aren't trying to control their child. They're trying to control the anxiety inside of themselves, right? So when we are trying to get a kid to calm down and stop crying, right, it's because we're getting worked up. If we're trying to punish a kid for a behavior, it's because something in here is going on with us. And control is really challenging, and I have a hard time working with this for myself and for others, because control can create the illusion of safety. right? Now, damaging everything on the outside, damaging our connection with the people we love the most. It's like wearing a life jacket. You know, in deep waters, in a lake, in an ocean, okay, if you're not a strong swimmer, makes a ton of sense. That's your safety. That protects you. But what happens when you're not in the water and you're still walking around with that life jacket on? That's what it's like to have survival patterns, such as control. It's our life jacket. To us, it makes a ton of sense. To other people, they're looking at us like, why are you wearing a life jacket? You don't need it. And in our mind, we're thinking, they're crazy. Like, of course, I do need it. This makes me feel like I'm okay. Another one is all or nothing thinking. The critic loves to go in extremes, right? So this happens a lot. I'll say, hey, maybe your wife wasn't completely wrong there. And a client of mine will go, oh, so I'm wrong. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy. Right? So we go from one extreme to another. And that's where the inner critic lives, right? There's no middle ground. There's no open-mindedness. There's no like, hey, you know what? Okay, I see both sides here. You know, I get it. It's I'm either succeeding at something or I'm miserably failing. I'm either a good parent or I'm just doing something completely wrong and I'm screwing my kid up. You know, I'm sober a long time. I'm doing recovery really well. This is great. Or, I don't know, maybe I should be doing more. Maybe, I'm not doing enough. I'm either healthy, right, and taking care of myself, or I'm completely broken, beyond repairable. The critic leaves very little room for being human. This is where we're human. You know, I do believe in self-love and self-compassion. I don't worry about it with people that I work with, of being like, oh no, it's going to turn them into these self-centered narcissists. I've come across so many people over the years that use this inner critic to just beat themselves up, judge others, hold them back in life, where self-care, self-compassion, self-love, it's a great, it's very helpful for people. So I don't just push that aside. I don't worry about it with people that have spent years not loving themselves, not being compassionate, with making mistakes and falling short. And then the fourth one here is judgment. One thing people, we might not realize is that the critic often points outward too. So while this talk, some of us are like, yeah, I'm not that hard on myself. Sometimes I'm not. Maybe you could relate to being very judgmental, though, of others. Being hard on your spouse or your children, right? And I could help you tie it back. There's most likely there's at least one parent that was very hard on you as well. People who are hard on themselves are often hard on everyone else, not just family members, right? You're at work and you're like, what's wrong with this person? Like, can't they just do their job right? Like, I don't get it. It's not that difficult, right? That's judgment. The inner critic says, well, why would they do that? Why? I don't get it. What's wrong with them? Why do they live like that? Not for nothing, but, they should know better. They really should. I would never do that. I wouldn't do that. Those are all judgments. Now, what's confusing is we put it on these other people, whoever they are. It has nothing to do with them. And that's an eye-opener, but it's hard, though, for many of us, because we're so used to putting the on the outside, the emphasis on other people, that judgment to us just becomes second nature. It's almost like, why is that an issue? But judgment creates distance. It does not bring people together. When you are judging others and you're being harsh and critical of other people, you might be wanting connection and love, which most of us actually want, but it's just these survival patterns that are blocking us off from that. I always say it's like the hug that everybody wants, right? Like one hand is pulling someone in for a hug, but the other one is still in survival mode, so it's kind of pushing you away. That's how many of us are dealing with relationships. It's like, I don't understand. They don't understand me. They're not listening to me. I don't feel appreciated and valued. But we are living in a way that's kind of creating some of that to play out. Many times, the things that we judge most harshly in others, and this is something that really irks me, we've never fully healed or accepted within ourselves. I mean, this one I battle good with, because I still go into these modes sometimes. And, I learned years ago, when you have one finger pointing out, there's like three more pointing back at you. That one's tough, to be able to realize and be aware one day that whenever we are getting into this protective judgment part of us, it's because of something going on with us, something that's unhealed within us. And we do this as parents too. When children are doing things that we judge, that we just don't get, oftentimes it could be something that, like, let's say you have a kid who's getting older and they're like, afraid of the night, dark, or the darkness, or they're afraid of bugs or something. And as a parent, maybe you learned early on that, like, showing any of that type of fear was worrisome, right? Because you got to develop this kid to get out into the real world and be able to handle themselves. So it could be triggering for a parent who has a lot of fear themselves. Not necessarily a parent who's feared bugs or who's feared, the darkness at nighttime, but a parent who fears being weak, being seen, right, as weak. And that might trigger the parents when a kid is doing that, especially if the kid starts doing it outside the home, maybe in front of people. That just adds a little bit more to the pot. And that's something, that's another thing that we look at is in this type of work that I do is exactly that. Getting past the surface level stuff as to why or what's going on with me. And not defending, being like, no, it is this other person. Like, they are the problem. And saying, all right, let me take a look what's going on within me. So if you can keep in mind perfectionism, control, all or nothing thinking, judgment, those four, every one of them is trying to protect you from uncomfortability, from discomfort, from an old wound resurfacing, from pain, from struggling, suffering. The inner critic in your system is, again, trying to maintain safety. That's what it's trying to do. It wants safety. It's got the life jacket on, right? Half the time might not need it. The danger is gone. But many of us feel threatened a lot throughout a given day. And that's when we go into, these patterns of ours. Because for us, it worked. Sometimes they still work, and we don't want to let them go. At the same time, they're creating anxiety for you. Right? We don't want to deal with having to work through or heal the shame that we already have. But the inner critic is propelling us to live life that's only going to produce more shame. Right? It's like alcoholism. It's like the only thing that relieves the alcoholic of all the shame that they have in their system is drinking. It is a great answer to many of our, ailments. But because the person abuses alcohol and maybe does things under the influence, says things, thinks in a way, acts in a way that's not really who they want to be, more shame. Right? And then there's that cycle, right? So I'm acting out alcoholically, it's creating a lot of shame, or building on top of shame that I already carry, which makes me want to drink a little bit more. But then that develops more shame, so I drink more. And it's not just alcoholism, right? It's these 4 areas that I talked about. Maybe I have a lot of shame, and so I become a perfectionist. But being a perfectionist, I'm constantly running. And that's just going to create more shame. I fear one of my core wounds is abandonment. I fear that. I don't ever want to feel physically or emotionally abandoned again. And so I control things in my family, in my life. Deep down, I just don't want you to leave me. Now, I don't know that. I don't come out and say that because I'm not fully aware of that. I genuinely think I'm controlling because of, these reasons. But, it has something going on within us. When I take a look back at my own sobriety, my own life, I can see how much I was driven by my inner critic. Because I see how much it makes me want to continue doing this work, not just for you and clients, for me. I've had things where I struggled in class, in school, and especially in high school. And I did the comparison that I talked about earlier, where I compared myself to other classmates. How come they seem to understand it? Is everyone here smarter than me? I also went to a pretty competitive high school. It was a very good high school. And that also made me, I don't want to say that made me, but I showed up in that high school kind of with a lot of self-doubt. And so for me, one of my protectors of way of dealing with it was to control. And control isn't exactly what we think it is. It's not like looking through our spouse's phone all the time, right? It's not like saying, you can't wear that outside. That's not just what I mean by control. I mean, controlling outcomes because of not feeling confident enough to be able to handle what might happen. So instead of studying and working really hard to get a good grade on a test, I might do something else to get a good grade on the test. Or I might start accepting the fact that I don't know what the heck is going on. Start cracking jokes about it, which is what I did. I would turn humor into all of this. And that was another survival mechanism that I used. So that when I did get the 40 back from the test or the 50 back, I tried to use humor to mask that it was actually kicking up a lot of shame and embarrassment and feeling less than compared to my peers. And it can happen in many things, especially as we get older, and relationships and work, colleagues, sports. It's funny. One of the guys I work with now, top athlete, solid athlete, and what he was doing in the sports he was playing, and driven by trying to avoid the 7 core wounds that I talk about, driven by shame. And I think how many kids I was in high school with probably had that I compared myself to, like, oh, this kid just got it made. Look how phenomenal they are in baseball or football or wrestling or basketball. Like, never knowing that maybe what's propelling them to become the best is because if anything less than that happens, it just solidifies the belief that they carry within themselves that they are less than, that they aren't good enough. That's why it's surprising, and I teach my son this, and I try to talk to other kids about this too, like who we be careful we idolize, who we give our attention to. Because these people might look like they have it all and could be really suffering on the inside, having no clue how to live life, having been through their own dysfunctional upbringing. But somehow, some way, you hear musicians now come out and talk about this stuff now. How for years people are like, oh, I wish I was them. Look at everything they get to do in life and travel the world, and everybody loves them and all the money they make. And then they come out and they go, yeah, I suffer from OCD. I suffer from, anxiety and depression. We could take a look at athletes and celebrities all the time who's going in and out of rehab for some form of alcohol or drug abuse. Now, I believe all of this stuff goes back to a root, which is the 7 core wounds that I address. Even for myself, success to me is always outside of me. It's never being connected to God. It's never being connected to the people closest to me. No, it's being very self-reliant. It's about what car I'm driving, how much money I'm making, what kind of job I have. I had a great job in the past that would have offered me an early retirement, making great money. Financially, it would have been really, really great. And I lost that job. And, I remember I ran into a supervisor maybe about 3 years after I lost that job. And I could, he was uncomfortable, because you don't know, like, I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, right? That's what people would think. And I was in a place where I was just changing my life so much that I was like, man, I've never felt this grateful for losing something, right? That everybody would be like crushed to lose. Now, don't get me wrong. It did hurt when I lost it. And it took me years to start to develop any type of appreciation and gratitude for actually losing the job. But I could see him being like you must be delusional, right? But I saw it as, sure, I could have that job and still be highly judgmental, dysfunctional, shame-based. Okay. Yeah, maybe I retire at 40, 45 years old. Great. Maybe I collect my pension. Beautiful. Yeah. But maybe I still struggle with self-doubt, lack of confidence, low self-worth. See, all of that started to change after I lost that job when I started doing a lot of this work. So for me, my perspective on success started to shift over the years. I do believe, for me, it was a little bit more of a mature understanding of success. Now, with that said, do I still want to live in a nice house? Sure. Do I still want to make more income? Yeah. Not just to have it. I'd love to be able to fix up my house even nicer than it is now, or be able to take my family on vacation. Right? It's not so I can run to the dealership and lease me a brand new car. You know, I never realized how much my survival patterns were exhausting me. You know, even with making good money or having a good job, whatever the case may be for you. You know, getting sober, by the way, too, like over the years, didn't necessarily remove my inner critic. And I know I talk a lot about sobriety, which you know, major game changer for me, because I do believe that getting the help you need can save your life. I know getting the help I needed helped save my life and help get me back on track, but I don't believe that it goes deep enough on an emotional, relational level. And I'm pretty sure about that now that I've gone through what I've gone through. You know, I went back to college in my 30s, I was a little bit more grounded at the time, which was great. But again, it still didn't remove some of the things that I've been looking at the past 4 years. I graduated with a degree in physical education. I stayed for another couple of years, got a master's degree in counseling, and still struggled with control, all or nothing thinking, perfectionism, and judgment because of these core wounds. I studied the DSM for 2 years, all the symptoms and this and that. And I took psychology, abnormal psychology, psychopathology. It's amazing that I learned most of this stuff. Honestly, it was like self-taught. And then I also came across a man who was invested over the years with inner child work. And then I started doing that, and that opened the door for doing this internal family systems therapy model parts work. And my wife says, yeah, it was great that you changed in sobriety, but, you know, we still had a ton of issues. She says, but I've never seen such a change with you over the past 4 years than when you started this inner child parts work path. She's never felt more loved by me, more connected, and vice versa. I mean, I could see so clearly now some of the things that I just couldn't see before. You know, I would genuinely believe that she was the problem in certain situations and circumstances. And now I look at it and it was like, wow, like it was me being in my survival part. So, you know, becoming a husband and a father did not remove that. None of that healed me. No matter what I accomplished out here, I either judged myself too much or I put that judgment on others. And when we do this with a spouse, man, is it really hard to live in the same house together. When you're constantly judging her or she's judging you, you're judging each other. I don't know. It's not why I got married. I don't want to live in the same house always full of tension and resentment and, trying to get along, but not really, and feeling just disconnected. But here I am thinking, if I achieve enough, if I work hard enough, if she's pretty enough, if the house is big enough, everything's going to be good. Even spiritually, I learned over the years I had a spiritual part, which is very conniving, right? I can hide behind my spiritual part. Hey, I'm out here. I'm trying to get people sober. I'm helping people. Nothing to look at here. Hey, I did a lot of my healing recovery work. I'm fixed. I'm a work in progress, but I'm doing a lot better than a lot of other people. So, it's not necessarily me. Like it's it's her, it's him, it's them that needs to change. You know, hey, I'm doing my part. And that spiritual part got me in a lot of trouble. Created a lot of upset moments in my life. And it was impossible for me to see without help. You know, that spiritual part had me believing I'm living God's will. So the way we talk to ourselves often affects how we talk to the people we love. And people who are hard on themselves are often hard on their spouse and their children. Right? That whole like, love your neighbor as you love yourself. I'll do a whole nother talk on love. But I didn't, man, that's a powerful word. I think many of us are misusing love and not backing up using the word love. And if I don't love myself, which I don't think a lot of us do, I don't think we're running around admitting that to ourselves. There's a lot of denial when it comes to that. I also can relate to that. But same thing with the inner critic. You know, I'm hard on myself, but if I'm hard on myself, I'm hard on you too. And I don't know what spouses out there or children out there need that. You know, when your child makes a mistake, you know, what shows up? What's the first on the scene? Is it empathy? Is it an open, loving heart? Is it compassion? Or is it the first thing you want to do is let loose on them? Right? Let that inner critic come out. Unhealed self-criticism often spills into our relationships. And sometimes we're not reacting to our spouse or our child. We're reacting to something old inside of us that we don't want to deal with. I mean, think about the last time you made a mistake. You know? Or try to remember next time you make a mistake. Tomorrow, next week. Pay attention to what you're telling yourself. Right? Would you speak to your friend that way? I always say that. You know, it's amazing how much compassion some of us have. If our friend was kind of beating ourselves up like we do, we'd be like, come on, man. You know, we try to help him out. You know, sometimes our children, you know, maybe we are showing up a little more loving with them. So why, if we could show them love, we can't show ourselves love? Right? Why is it acceptable when you make a mistake to speak and think about yourself in that way? So here's the thing. Oh, I just need to get rid of the inner critic and then I'll be all good, right? Same thing with anger. I just need to get rid of anger and then I'll be all good. I don't agree. Healing is not getting rid of the inner critic. Right? I never want to be rid of anger. When somebody crosses my boundaries, I want to get good and frustrated. The goal is not to silence the inner critic forever. In fact, that's what most of us do, and they dig their heels into the sand even more. Right? Those parts of us that we try not to deal with just become louder in our system. The goal is really just to recognize it in our life. Right? To stop mistaking it as our voice and as the truth. So what healing looks like eventually as you keep working on this is what I guide people on, this is what I'm working through, is you start to become aware. Wow, I'm starting to be a little harsh with myself, with my spouse, with my child. Right? Offering yourself some self-compassion, being curious. Why am I getting so judgmental right now? Why am I falling into this all or nothing thinking? Why do I need to control right now? What am I scared of? What am I worried about? Right? That takes a lot of emotional honesty when we start diving into that. And then we have to accept ourselves, because what we start to realize is we're very imperfect. We have a lot of things about ourselves we don't like. We're showing up in ways in our life that we start learning. The awareness is great. It also brings up an awareness of where we're falling short. So we want to develop healthier self-talk. So we're not going to try to motivate ourselves into healing by attacking ourselves. You know, some people follow David Goggins out there. He's a big fitness guy. You know, I think he's good for exactly that. Motivating somebody possibly to exercise, maybe get in better shape. You know, if I wanted to become a Navy SEAL or something, maybe I'd reach out to the guy and get there. But his way is very shame-based, like a lot of men on social media. Very shame-based, very put you down first. That type of thing. Tough love type of attitude. Nobody cares about your feelings. You know, this world is, you know, you got to go after it on your own type of mindset, which to me, it's just, that's all. I work with tons of men that it's not working for them. So we don't motivate ourselves by beating ourselves up. And really, we're just trying to avoid something, but we just want to maintain being loved, feeling accepted, right? The approval that all of us want. The inner critic may have helped you, you know, get past your childhood, but it doesn't have to run what's happening in your life now. So, you know, I have, 2 minutes left. So any questions, anybody that was out there listening want to have any questions? I try to stick to the hour to check it out. I also have these talks on my Facebook page. Jared, Jared, Davin, Davin. So after these Facebook Lives, they get saved for 30 days. Head on over. Put it on speed 2. So it takes the hour talk down to 30 minutes because I know, you know, I think and I process as I talk. So it comes across a little slowly. I understand. But yeah, check these talks out. I think they're super helpful. I just gave a talk at the Mount Pleasant Library on Thursday, and I'm giving one this Tuesday at the Mount Kisco Library. I'm trying to make my rounds here in Westchester County. Really, my main goal is for healthier, more functional marriages and parenting. That's what I want. That's what, you know, that's what's changing my life and what I want for others. One more minute. I'll just see if anybody wants to throw anything out there, ask anything before I log off. All right. Hope you got something out of the video.